My daughter whispered, "Don't ruin this," so I left her wedding. And that was the moment everything in my life finally came into focus. My name is Thomas. I'm 74 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that being a good father meant knowing when to step back, when to stay quiet, when to swallow your own feelings so your child could have the life they deserved. I learned that lesson the hard way. My wife, Laura, passed away when our daughter Emily was only 8 years old. Cancer came quickly. One year we were talking about family vacations. The next I was standing beside a hospital bed, holding her hand, promising I would take care of our little girl no matter what. And I did. At least I tried. From that day on, Emily became my whole world. I learned how to pack lunches with little notes inside. I learned how to braid hair by watching old videos because she wanted it, just like Mom used to do. I learned how to cook simple meals that wouldn't burn and how to sit quietly at the edge of her bed when nightmares woke her in the middle of the night. I worked longer hours to keep us afloat. I turned down promotions that would have taken me away from home. I stopped going out with friends. Every choice I made was about keeping her life steady, predictable, safe. She grew up kind, smart, independent. And as she grew, I taught myself something else. Don't be the embarrassing dad. Don't be the clingy one. Don't make her feel different because she doesn't have a mom. So I stood in the background, cheered quietly, clapped politely, let other parents take photos while I stayed a step behind. I told myself I was doing the right thing. By the time Emily went off to college, she hugged me at the door and said, "You've done enough, Dad. I'll be okay." I smiled and said I knew. But when I closed that door behind her, I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. After that, life became very quiet. We talked on the phone once a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. I didn't want to bother her. She had classes, friends, a life. When she told me she was getting married, my heart nearly burst. "Dad, he's wonderful," she said. "I want you there, I really do." Those words meant everything to me. For months before the wedding, I replayed old memories in my head, teaching her to ride a bike, helping with science projects, sitting in folding chairs at school concerts, watching her scan the crowd until she found my face. I imagined walking her down the aisle, standing beside her, just like I had when she was little and scared of the dark. The wedding was held in a beautiful old hall just outside town. White flowers lined the aisle. Soft music floated through the air. Everything looked like something out of one of those magazines her mother used to keep stacked by the couch. I arrived early, wearing my best suit, the one I only wore to funerals and special days. I had polished my shoes the night before, trimmed my beard, even practiced tying my tie twice to make sure it looked right. I wanted to look like I belonged. People were already gathering, laughing, hugging, taking photos. I stood near the entrance, hands folded, watching. That's when I saw Emily. She was standing near the back room, surrounded by bridesmaids, her dress glowing under the soft lights. When she saw me, she smiled and walked over. "Dad," she said, giving me a quick hug, "you made it." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. She looked beautiful, just like her mother had all those years ago. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "You look incredible," I finally managed. She smiled. "Thanks, it's a little crazy back here." "I can imagine," I said. "Just tell me where you need me." She glanced around, distracted. "I think just wait here for now. They're organizing everyone." "All right," I said. I stepped aside as people moved around us. Every few minutes, someone would gently redirect me. "Oh, could you stand over here?" "Sorry, we need this space." We'll get you when it's time. Always polite. Always pushing me just a little farther back. I told myself not to make a fuss. That's when I noticed her future mother-in-law. She was at the center of everything, laughing loudly, hugging people, giving instructions like she owned the place. Everyone seemed drawn to her energy. I didn't mind. I wasn't there to be in charge. I was there to be a father. But as the minutes passed, I realized something. No one was coming to get me. The music began to shift. Guests were being seated. The room grew quieter. I walked toward Emily, who was adjusting her veil near the doors. "Emily," I said softly, "aren't we supposed to, walk together?" She turned to me, eyes wide, a flicker of panic crossing her face. She leaned closer and whispered, so only I could hear, "Dad, don't ruin this, okay?" The words landed heavier than any shout ever could. "Ruin this," I repeated quietly. She sighed. "I just mean everything's stressful already. Please don't make a scene. We've got a plan." A plan. One I wasn't part of. I wanted to say something. To tell her that walking her down the aisle wasn't about making a scene. That it was something I had dreamed about since she was a little girl holding my hand at school. But I saw the tension in her face. And I remembered all the years I'd taught myself to step back. So I nodded. "Of course," I said softly, "I won't ruin anything." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. Then she turned away. The doors opened. The music swelled. And my daughter walked down the aisle. Without me. I stood alone in the hallway, watching from a distance, my hands at my sides, feeling something inside my chest slowly crack open. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't just being asked to stay quiet. I was being asked to disappear. The music swelled through the hall, soft and full, the kind that makes your chest tighten even when you do know why. Guests rose to their feet. I stood where I was, just outside the doors, watching through a narrow gap as my daughter walked down the aisle. She looked beautiful, radiant, so much like her mother in that moment that my breath caught in my throat. But she wasn't walking toward me. She was walking away. I stayed there half hidden in the hallway, listening as the officiant began to speak. Every word echoed faintly through the doorway. Love, commitment, family. All the words that used to mean something simple. I leaned against the wall, feeling the cold through my suit jacket, trying to steady my breathing. My hands trembled, so I tucked them into my pockets like I used to do when Emily was little, and I didn't want her to see I was nervous. I told myself to go inside, to take a seat, to be there even if I wasn't where I thought I would be. That's what a good father would do, right? But as I took one step toward the door, I heard her whisper again in my mind. "Don't ruin this." And I realized something painful. If I went in now, I wouldn't be there as her father. I'd be there as a problem to manage. So I stopped. The words of the ceremony blurred together as memories pushed their way in. Emily at 5 years old, clinging to my leg on her first day of school, begging me not to leave. Emily at 12, crying over a science project that wasn't working until we sat on the floor together and figured it out. Emily at 16, slamming her bedroom door after our first real argument, then opening it again an hour later to say she was sorry. All those moments where she had needed me. All those moments where I had been there. And now, on the biggest day of her life, I was being asked not to be. I didn't feel angry. I felt empty. Like someone had slowly erased me from a picture I used to belong in. The music shifted again, softer now. I knew what that meant. They were exchanging vows. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear her voice, young and hopeful, promising a life to someone else. And I was glad for her, truly. I wanted her to have a life full of love. But I also felt a deep ache for the part of her life that no longer seemed to include me. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to stand in that hallway feeling like I was in the way. I wasn't going to sit quietly in the back, pretending it didn't hurt. I wasn't going to spend the rest of the day reminding myself not to be a burden. If I stayed, I would disappear. So instead, I turned. I walked back down the hallway, past the coats and the stacked boxes and the signs pointing toward the reception hall. No one stopped me. No one noticed. Everyone was inside, focused on the ceremony. The front doors stood open, letting in a breath of cool air. I stepped outside. The sound of the wedding faded behind me as the doors closed. In its place, there was only quiet, the soft rustle of trees, the distant hum of traffic. I stood there on the stone steps for a moment, my chest tight, my eyes burning. Then I took a breath. And I kept walking. I didn't run, I didn't rush. I just walked down the path, away from the building, away from the music, away from the day I had waited for. Each step felt heavy, but also strangely calm. Like I was finally being honest with myself. I reached my car, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel without turning the engine on. I rested my forehead against my hands and let the silence wash over me. I thought about calling someone. A friend. A neighbor. Anyone. But I didn't. Because, what would I say? That I had left my own daughter's wedding. That I didn't feel like I belonged. So I just sat there until the burning in my eyes faded and my breathing slowed. Then I started the car. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove without much direction, letting the road decide for me. The town slipped by. Familiar streets. Places I used to go when Emily was small. The park where we'd fed ducks on Sunday mornings. The library where she'd begged me to check out one more book. I parked near the river and got out, walking slowly to the railing. The water moved quietly below, steady and endless. I leaned against the cold metal and watched it flow, thinking about how many years had passed, how many moments I had spent trying to be what I thought she needed, and wondering when I had stopped being what she wanted. I stayed there for a long time, until the sun began to dip lower in the sky. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at it. A message from Emily. "Dad, where did you go?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know what to say yet. I slid the phone back into my pocket and kept watching the water. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just letting myself feel it. And that was the beginning of something I never expected. I stayed by the river until the light began to fade and the air grew colder. The water kept moving, steady and quiet, like it didn't care about weddings or mistakes or old men standing at the edge of it, trying to understand their lives. Eventually, my legs began to ache, and I knew I couldn't stand there forever. So I went back to my car and drove home. The house greeted me with silence when I opened the door. The familiar smell of old wood and clean laundry wrapped around me as I stepped inside. I hung my jacket by the door, then stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. I had imagined this house would feel empty once Emily moved out. I hadn't imagined it would feel empty because of her. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, then sat at the table where I'd helped her with homework so many nights. The chair across from me was empty, but I could almost see her there, feet swinging, pencil tapping against her notebook while she waited for an answer. "You already know it, Em," I whispered to the empty room. "You just need to believe it." I shook my head, surprised at myself. I hadn't spoken her name out loud like that in a long time. I wandered into the living room and sat in my chair, staring at the dark television screen. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. Every sound in the house seemed sharper than usual. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "Dad, everyone is asking where you are. Please call me." I picked up the phone and held it in my hands. My heart wanted to answer, to rush back, to apologize, to say I didn't mean to cause trouble. That's what I'd always done. But another part of me, quieter but stronger, said no. Not yet. So I typed a short reply. "I'm okay, I just needed some air. We'll talk later." I stared at the words before sending them, then pressed the button. A few seconds later, 3 dots appeared on the screen, then disappeared. No reply came. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood outside. A car passing, a dog barking, wind in the trees. My mind kept replaying the moment in the hallway. Her face tense and distracted. The whisper, "Don't ruin this." I tried to see it from her side. She was nervous, excited, under pressure, surrounded by expectations and plans and people pulling her in different directions. Maybe she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But no matter how I looked at it, the words still hurt. Because they told me something I hadn't wanted to admit. That somewhere along the way, I had become something she worried might get in the way. Not someone she leaned on. Not someone she wanted beside her. Just someone to manage. I rolled onto my side and stared at the wall. "I tried, Laura," I whispered, thinking of my wife. "I tried to raise her right." Tears slipped down my cheeks, quiet and unexpected. I hadn't cried like that in years. Not when Emily left for college. Not when she moved across town. Not even when she told me she was getting married. But now, alone in the dark, I let myself cry. Because for the first time, I wasn't just losing a role. I was losing a place. Morning came slowly. Sunlight crept through the curtains, lighting up the dust in the air. I sat up in bed feeling stiff and tired, like I hadn't slept at all. In the kitchen, I made coffee out of habit, then stood there staring at the mug as if I didn't know what to do with it. My phone lay on the counter. No new messages. I picked it up and scrolled through the photos I kept saved. Emily at 6, missing 2 front teeth, grinning proudly. Emily at 10, holding a science fair ribbon. Emily at 16, leaning against my old truck, pretending she wasn't posing. So many moments. So much time. And now, a day I'd waited for all those years had passed without me. I set the phone down and rubbed my eyes. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Tired of always trying to be small enough not to bother anyone. That afternoon, I took a slow walk around the neighborhood. People waved as they passed. A few asked about the wedding. "How was it?" Mrs. Carter called from her porch. "It was beautiful," I said, forcing a smile. Which wasn't a lie. I just hadn't been there to see most of it. When I got back home, my phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. Dad, I'm sorry if I upset you yesterday. I didn't mean it like that. I was just overwhelmed. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. This time, I didn't ignore it. I typed back, "Yes, we can talk, just not today." There was a pause. Then she replied, "Okay, I love you." My chest tightened as I read those words. "I love you too," I typed, and meant it. That evening, as the sun set and shadows filled the house, I sat in my chair and realized something. Leaving the wedding hadn't been about punishing her. It had been about finally admitting that I was hurting. And that maybe, for once, it was all right to let that be seen. Because if I kept pretending everything was fine, nothing would ever change. 2 days passed before Emily came to see me. I spent those days in a strange quiet, not quite peaceful, not quite restless either. I went through my routines, made coffee, took short walks, sat in my chair and watched the light change in the room. But everything felt suspended, like I was waiting for something I couldn't yet name. On the second afternoon, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I knew it was her before I even looked out the window. My heart started beating faster, and for a moment I considered staying where I was, letting her knock, letting her wait. But then I stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, Emily was standing there, still looking tired from the wedding, her hair pulled back, eyes uncertain. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "Hi, Em," I replied. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. Not the quick squeeze from before. A real hug. One that lingered. I felt her shoulders shake slightly, and I wrapped my arms around her without thinking. "I'm sorry," she whispered into my shoulder. I closed my eyes. "I know," I said quietly. We went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same place where she had once done homework, the same place where I had sat alone the night of her wedding. She folded her hands together and took a deep breath. "I didn't sleep much after you left," she said. "Everyone kept asking where you were. I kept saying you just needed air, but it didn't feel right." I nodded. "Then, during the reception," she continued, "I kept looking at the door, waiting for you to come back. And when you didn't, I realized I'd hurt you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I was just so stressed. Everything felt like it had to be perfect." "I understand," I replied. "Weddings do that to people." She looked down. "But I shouldn't have said what I said. I shouldn't have made you feel like you were in the way." I took a breath. "It wasn't just the words, Emily," I said gently. "It was what they meant to me." She looked up. "I've spent most of your life trying not to be a burden," I said. "Trying not to embarrass you, trying to stay small so you could grow big. And I thought that was what being a good father meant." She listened, silent. "But standing in that hallway," I continued, "I realized that somewhere along the way, I stopped being someone you leaned on and became someone you managed." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I never wanted you to feel like that," she said. "You've always been my rock." "I know," I said, "and maybe that's part of it. Rocks don't get noticed much. They're just there." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I noticed," she said. "I just didn't realize how much you were carrying." We sat there in silence for a moment, hands joined. Then she said, "After you left, my husband asked me where you were supposed to be during the ceremony. I told him you were going to walk me down the aisle." My heart tightened. "And he said, then why didn't he?" she continued. I looked at her. "And I didn't have a good answer," she whispered. That's when it hit me. I hadn't even thought about what that moment meant to you. She wiped her eyes. I was so focused on not messing anything up, she said, that I messed up the one thing that really mattered. I squeezed her hand. You didn't ruin everything, I said. You just reminded me that I needed to be honest about how I felt. She nodded. I'm glad you left, she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. Not because I wanted you to go, she added quickly, but because if you hadn't, I don't think I would have understood. We talked for a long time after that. About her childhood, about her mother, about how scared she'd been to lose me too when she was little, about how she'd learned to be strong by watching me hold everything together. And I guess, she said, I thought you didn't need anything back. I smiled sadly. I did, I just didn't know how to ask. She leaned across the table and hugged me again. I don't want you to be small in my life, Dad, she said. I want you to be right there with me, even if it's messy sometimes. I nodded, my throat tight. I'd like that, I said. Before she left, she stood at the door and looked back at me. I can't change what happened at the wedding, she said, but I want to make it right, in whatever way I can. I smiled softly. We'll figure it out. After she drove away, I sat back down at the kitchen table and let out a long breath. For the first time since the wedding, the weight in my chest felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. Because now, at least, I wasn't invisible anymore. After Emily's visit, the house didn't feel quite as heavy anymore. It was still quiet, still mostly empty, but the silence had changed. It wasn't pressing in on me the way it had before. It felt more like a pause, like something was waiting to begin. That evening, she called me on the phone. Did I leave my scarf there? She asked, trying to sound casual. The blue one, I said. It's hanging by the door. She laughed softly. I thought so. I'll pick it up later this week. We talked a little more after that, about the drive home, about how tired she was, about how strange it felt to be married. Before we hung up, she said, I'm really glad you're my dad. I held the phone close for a moment after the call ended. So was I. Over the next few days, she started calling more often. Not long conversations, just checking in, telling me little things, asking what I was doing. It reminded me of when she was in college and would call home when she was overwhelmed, pretending she just wanted to talk about the weather. One afternoon, she stopped by again, this time with her husband, Mark. Mark was polite, kind, a good man. He shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye. I'm really sorry about what happened at the wedding, he said. I didn't realize until later that you were supposed to walk Emily down the aisle. I wish I'd known. It's all right, I said. What matters is we're talking now. We sat in the living room together, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was being careful with my words. I told them stories about Emily when she was little. The time she tried to bake cookies on her own and filled the kitchen with smoke. The time she stayed up all night finishing a project because she didn't want to disappoint her teacher. Mark listened closely, smiling at her, like he was seeing parts of her for the first time. I didn't know that, he said more than once. And that felt good. Not because I needed to impress him, but because it felt like my place in her life was becoming real again. A few days later, Emily invited me over for dinner. Just us, she said. No big crowd. I want you to feel comfortable. I hesitated at first. Old habits die hard, but then I said yes. When I arrived, she opened the door and hugged me, pulling me inside before I could even take my coat off. You're early, she said. I didn't want to be late, I replied. The smell of food filled the house, and for a moment it reminded me of our old kitchen when she was small. Busy, warm, full. We sat down to eat, and something simple but important happened. She asked me questions. Not polite ones. Not surface ones. Real ones. How are you really doing, Dad? Do you get lonely? What do you do with your days? No one had asked me those things in a long time. I get by, I said honestly. But yeah, sometimes I do get lonely. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. I don't want you to feel like you have to handle everything on your own anymore, she said. I smiled. That might take me some time to learn. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We've both got things to learn, she said. After dinner, we sat on the couch, and she showed me wedding photos on her phone. There were dozens, her in her dress, the ceremony, the dancing. I scrolled through them slowly. There was one of her standing alone near the doors before the ceremony, adjusting her veil. That was right before you came to talk to me, she said quietly. I nodded. I wish you were in more of these, she said, looking at the pictures. I didn't realize until later how much I wanted you there. I didn't answer right away. I wish I had been there too, I said finally, but I'm glad we're here now. She leaned her head on my shoulder, just for a moment, like she used to when she was tired as a kid. I promise, she said softly, I won't make you feel like you're in the way again. I swallowed. And I promise, I replied, I won't disappear without telling you how I feel. We sat like that for a while, the room quiet around us. On the drive home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that settles in your chest and tells you things might be different from now on. Back at my house, I stood in the doorway for a moment before going inside, looking up at the dark sky. For years, I had believed being a good father meant standing back. But maybe being a good father also meant letting yourself be seen. The weeks after that dinner passed quietly, but something between Emily and me had shifted. She started calling every few days, sometimes just to tell me something small, a funny moment at work, a recipe she tried that didn't turn out right, a show she thought I might like. And sometimes she called just to ask how I was. At first, I didn't quite know how to answer. I'm fine, I'd say out of habit. But then I started catching myself. I'm all right, I'd say instead, but today felt long. Or I went for a walk, but it would have been nicer with company. Or I miss hearing someone else in the house sometimes. Each time she listened. Really listened. And each time, it felt a little easier to be honest. One afternoon, she surprised me by stopping by again, this time with a small box in her hands. I brought something for you, she said. I raised an eyebrow. I hope it's not more leftovers. She laughed. No, it's something I found while unpacking wedding gifts. She set the box on the table and opened it. Inside was a framed photo. It was an old one, me and her years ago sitting on the front steps of our house. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, missing teeth, hair a mess, leaning against me with her head on my shoulder. I stared at it, my chest tightening. I didn't even know you still had this, I said. I found it in one of your old albums, she replied. I took a picture of it years ago because I liked how we both looked so comfortable. She hesitated. I want you to have it somewhere you'll see it, she said, not tucked away in a drawer. I picked up the frame and studied it. We looked happy. Simple. Like nothing in the world could pull us apart. I'll put it in the living room, I said, right by my chair. She smiled. Good, that's where you are most of the time anyway. That evening, after she left, I placed the photo on the small table beside my chair. Every time I sat down after that, I saw it. A quiet reminder. A few days later, Emily called again. Dad, she said, a little hesitant, Mark and I were thinking, we never really got that moment at the wedding, the one where you walk me down the aisle. My heart skipped. I know we can't redo the day, she continued, but would you come with us to the park this weekend? There's a little gazebo there. We thought maybe we could dress up a bit and just do it. For us. I was quiet for a moment, afraid my voice would betray me. You do want that? I asked. I really would, she said. I swallowed hard. Then yes, I'd like that very much. That Saturday, I put on my suit again, the same one I'd worn to the wedding. I straightened my tie in the mirror and took a long look at myself. You get another chance, I whispered. At the park, the leaves were just starting to change. A few people walked by, but most kept their distance. Mark stood near the gazebo, smiling as Emily waited a few steps away in a simple dress. Not a wedding dress, but she still looked like my little girl. I walked up to her slowly. She took my arm, just like I had imagined all those years. Ready, Dad, she said softly. Yes, I replied, I am. We walked together across the small path, not to music, not to applause, just to the sound of our footsteps and the wind in the trees. But it was enough. When we reached Mark, he nodded respectfully and said, Thank you, sir. I stepped back and watched as they stood together, hands joined. Emily turned to me, eyes shining. I'm really glad you're here, she said. So am I replied. Afterward, we sat on a bench nearby and talked for a while, laughing, remembering, sharing stories from when she was little. Before we parted, she hugged me tightly. I don't ever want you to feel like you're in the way again, she said. If I start to, you have to tell me. I nodded, and if I start to disappear, you have to pull me back. She smiled, deal. That night back at home, I sat in my chair and looked at the photo beside me, the one of us on the steps years ago. I thought about that moment in the hallway at the wedding, the whisper, the ache, the choice to leave. At the time, it had felt like the end of something. But now I saw it differently. It had been the beginning of finally speaking, of finally being honest, of finally letting myself be more than just the quiet figure in the background. My daughter whispered, Don't ruin this. So I left her wedding. And in doing so, I finally stopped ruining my own place in her life. Because sometimes, walking away is the only way to be seen.